Welcome to the German Perspective, where we pick news from German sources about American politics. Today's topic: Biden faces major backlash. Israel conflict alienates U.S. Democrats. It began during the primary election in Michigan. Over 100,000 U.S. Democrats in the state did not vote for Joe Biden because they disagreed with his Israel policy. Instead, they marked uncommitted on their ballots, showing their protest against the U.S. president's stance on this issue. Now, more than 500,000 voters have expressed their disapproval in this way. This poses a significant threat to Biden, as the mood could turn into a decisive election issue. His success in November depends on how many voters he can mobilize. Polls predict an extremely close duel against challenger Donald Trump. Even minor disruptions could be decisive. The war in the Gaza Strip has been raging for 6 months. Israel aims to eradicate the radical Islamic Hamas and has taken a hard line against Palestinian territories. Although it withdrew from the southern Gaza Strip over the weekend, the war is not over. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated he wants to achieve a hostage exchange currently being negotiated in Cairo, but also complete victory. This requires eliminating the last Hamas stronghold in the southern city of Rafah. This victory requires going to Rafah and eliminating the terrorist battalions there, Netanyahu said. This will happen. There is a date. In Rafah, about 1 million Palestinian civilians have sought refuge. The food situation is partially precarious, and the United Nations and others warn of a possible famine. This also affects the U.S. since the Hamas massacre in Israel that triggered the war. The mood in the U.S. has turned, predominantly among Democrats, and thus against the president. Biden warned Netanyahu against launching an offensive in Rafah, calling it a red line. For the U.S. pressure from Washington may have led to a strategic shift. Writes the New York Times. Israel will now likely proceed with targeted commands in Rafah instead of a large ground offensive against the radical Islamists. In the U.S., 55% of all voters reject Israel's military action in the Gaza Strip. Among Democrats, it's even 75%, and among the few independent voters, it's 60%. Only 2 to 3% of U.S. voters are truly independent, but they can make a difference in tight elections. The survey results come from before the Israeli attack on the aid convoy of World Central Kitchen. At that time, Biden had only 18% of Democrats supporting his stance on Israel. The numbers have likely worsened since then. Biden's policy was, until last week, unwaveringly siding with Israel. This is not surprising, as the U.S. has always been a steadfast ally and the major protector of Israel. Biden has also been a staunch advocate for Israeli interests for decades. As vice president under Barack Obama, he once said, "Israel could have a fistfight with us. We would still defend it." However, there have always been limits to the support U.S. presidents have shown their ally, just as there are now. Clear disagreements between Biden and Netanyahu are now evident, particularly regarding the tolerance limits of Palestinian suffering. After the attack on the aid convoy, Biden threatened Netanyahu in a phone call, if the situation for civilians in the Gaza Strip does not improve quickly, the U.S. would reconsider its support for Israel's war. It is not known what exactly this entailed. The U.S. supplies bombs and weapons to Israel, with $3.3 billion in military aid flowing to the Middle East annually. But the threat apparently worked. Netanyahu withdrew the troops. Behind closed doors, stronger words were likely exchanged. Biden has little left to do. Young voters are crucial for Biden, having brought the Democrats to office 4 years ago. Current polls show that the younger the U.S. Americans, the more dissatisfied they are with Biden's stance in the Israel war. Especially the progressive wing of the Democrats is highly critical of Israel and pro-Palestinian. How these voters will behave in November can only be guessed. Will enough of them grudgingly vote for Biden? Or will so many stay home or vote differently that it costs him the White House? Meanwhile, Trump sees movement. Netanyahu obviously feels more connected to Trump than to Biden. During Trump's term, they jointly presented a peace plan in Israel's favor. Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital and moved the U.S. embassy there, despite all the media outcry and threats from the Arab world. He also declared Israel's claim to the Golan Heights legitimate. In return, Israel named a newly established settlement there, Trump Heights. Biden and Netanyahu have known each other for over 5 decades. The once almost friendly relationship between the two is now, according to U.S. government officials, professional but contentiously difficult. The relationship is in a serious crisis. The Wall Street Journal quoted former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Itamar Rabinovich. At the beginning of the year, Israel had been harshly attacking Hamas for 3 months. It became personal when Netanyahu complained to Biden about reports that the U.S. government was preparing for a post-Netanyahu era. Biden brushed off the topic, but the episode shows their personal relationship plays a role. Biden later warned Netanyahu that a major attack on the city of Rafah would cross a red line. In his State of the Union address in March, the U.S. president told the Israeli leadership, "Humanitarian aid cannot be secondary or a bargaining chip." Biden emphasized his demands for more aid last week, and Netanyahu conceded. On Monday, the fighting in the southern Gaza Strip calmed as the Israeli army withdrew. A ceasefire based on a hostage exchange is currently being negotiated in Cairo. For Biden, the domestic political damage is immense, possibly irreparable by the November election. The Gaza Strip war, regardless of how Israel continues it, has already claimed tens of thousands of civilian lives. Most Hamas leaders are still alive, and thousands of their fighters are still active. Israel has at least temporarily withdrawn, leaving a power vacuum that Hamas could now fill again. One could also write, Israel has not yet achieved its goal. All this could have alienated parts of the voter base Biden relies on. They were already critical of his likely record in office despite extraordinary circumstances and historic legislative projects. The Democratic Party hopes that even the young voters will ultimately choose Biden in November, especially if the alternative is Donald Trump. But even if that happens, the base clearly feels estranged from their president. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more updates. See you next time.